They say some soldiers never stop standing guard, even after the war is over. But on a quiet Tuesday night inside the Veterans Medical Center in San Diego, it wasn't a soldier keeping watch in the hallway outside room 214. It was a German shepherd. The hospital lights hummed softly above polished floors, casting long pale reflections that stretched down the corridor like silent rivers of light. And at the far end of that hallway the dog sat perfectly still, ears forward, eyes locked on a single closed door, as if the entire world existed only on the other side of it. Nurses noticed him first just after midnight, a large shepherd with a dark saddle coat and intelligent amber eyes, sitting with the kind of patience that didn't belong to strays, the kind of patience that belonged to something trained, something loyal, something that understood waiting. One nurse whispered to another that the dog must belong to someone inside, but when they checked the patient chart, there was no pet listed, no family member with a service animal, nothing that explained why the dog refused to leave that exact spot in front of room 214. Every few minutes, he shifted slightly, not pacing, not whining, simply adjusting his weight the way a sentry might during a long watch. And then he would stare again at the door, as if listening for a sound no one else could hear. Inside that room lay Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker, United States Marine Corps, 32 years old, 6 feet tall, broad shoulders now quiet beneath white hospital sheets. A man who had not opened his eyes in nearly 3 years. Machines kept track of his breathing and heart rhythm, each soft electronic tone filling the dim room with a slow mechanical heartbeat, the kind of sound that makes time feel heavy. Doctors called it a deep coma caused by severe trauma sustained during deployment overseas, but to the nurses who had cared for him month after month, it felt more like a long, unfinished story, a life paused somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow. His parents had visited faithfully for the first year, then less often when hope became harder to carry, and eventually only photographs remained on the bedside table. A younger Ethan in dress blues, smiling beside a powerful German shepherd whose tongue hung happily from the side of his mouth. The two of them standing shoulder to shoulder, like partners who trusted each other with everything. No one in the hospital knew the dog in the photo had a name, and no one knew that name was Rex. Outside in the hallway, the shepherd lifted his head slightly when a cart rattled past, then settled again, nose pointed toward the door, breathing slowly, as if counting the seconds. Security eventually approached him, cautious but curious, expecting the dog to run or grow nervous, but he did neither. He simply glanced at the guard once, calm and steady, before returning his attention to room 214, like a guardian who had already decided exactly where he belonged. Something about that quiet determination made the guard pause instead of chasing him away, because sometimes instinct whispers things logic cannot explain. The minutes passed, then an hour, then another. Still the dog waited, eyes fixed on the door behind which a Marine slept somewhere deep inside a silence that doctors had stopped trying to measure. And though no one in that hallway understood it yet, the dog waiting outside that room had crossed nearly 200 miles to get there, guided by a memory stronger than distance, stronger than time, and stronger than the quiet belief that some bonds, especially the ones forged between a soldier and his dog, never truly break. By 3 o'clock in the morning the hallway had grown quieter, the kind of deep hospital quiet that only exists after visiting hours end and the world outside has fallen asleep. But the German shepherd remained in the exact same place outside room 214, as if time moved around him instead of through him. A night nurse named Carla Mendoza noticed it again when she returned from checking the cardiac wing, and she slowed her steps the moment she saw the silhouette of the dog sitting beneath the dim ceiling lights, his posture calm, patient, almost disciplined, the way a trained service dog waits for a command that has not yet been spoken. She crouched slowly a few feet away, careful not to startle him, and for the first time she could see the details in his face, the intelligent eyes, the steady breathing, the faint silver hairs beginning to appear around his muzzle that suggested he was no longer a young dog, but not yet old either. The strange thing was not that. He was there, but how certain he seemed that he belonged there. Carla gently spoke, her voice soft enough not to disturb the sleeping patients behind nearby doors. "Hello there, buddy. Do you belong to someone here?" The shepherd tilted his head slightly at the sound of her voice, but did not stand, did not retreat, and did not bark. Instead, he looked at her only for a moment before turning his gaze back toward the closed door of room 214, with quiet determination. Carla followed the direction of his stare and felt a small ripple of curiosity pass through her chest. That room belonged to Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker. Everyone on the night shift knew the name by now because he had been there longer than almost any other patient. 3 years earlier, he had arrived by military transport, unconscious and surrounded by doctors and quiet urgency. And since then, the rhythm of the machines in his room had become as familiar to the staff as the ticking of a clock. Carla had spoken to him many times during late-night rounds, even though she knew he could not answer. Sometimes people in comas could still hear voices, or so the neurologist said, and it felt wrong to treat him like an empty room. She would adjust his blankets, check the monitors, and tell him small, ordinary things about the hospital, about the weather outside, about the sunrise that would come in a few hours. Yet tonight something felt different in the air, as if the long silence surrounding Ethan Walker had shifted slightly. Carla stood up and glanced once more at the dog. The security guard at the far end of the corridor shrugged quietly, as if to say the animal had not caused any trouble. Finally, she made a small decision that would later seem much bigger than it felt in that moment. She walked to the nurse's station and opened Ethan Walker's digital chart, scanning the notes until she reached the photograph attached to his military record. The image showed a younger Ethan standing beside a powerful German shepherd wearing a working harness, both of them dusty from desert wind, yet smiling in the easy way partners do when they trust each other with their lives. Carla looked from the screen back toward the dog in the hallway. The shape of the ears was the same. The eyes were the same steady amber. A quiet realization began forming in her mind, slow and careful, like dawn appearing behind distant hills. She closed the chart, returned to the hallway, and whispered almost to herself, "Wait a minute. Could you really be him?" Carla took one slow step closer to the German shepherd, careful and quiet the way someone approaches an animal that has already chosen its own place in the world, and the dog watched her calmly without tension, his eyes steady and thoughtful, as if he were studying her just as closely as she was studying him. The hallway lights reflected softly in those amber eyes, and for a moment Carla felt the strange sensation that the dog understood far more about this place than anyone else did. She knelt down again, lowering herself until she was almost level with him, and gently extended her hand without touching him. The shepherd leaned forward slightly, not nervous, not excited, simply curious, and his nose brushed the air near her fingers before he looked once again toward the closed door of room 214. It was such a small movement, but the meaning behind it felt enormous. Carla turned her head slowly toward the door, then back toward the dog. "You are not waiting for food," she murmured softly. "You are waiting for him." The dog blinked once, his ears lifting a fraction higher, and the nurse felt a quiet shiver of realization travel down her spine. She stood up and walked back to the nurse's station, pulling up the hospital computer once more, this time searching deeper through the old intake records that had been archived since Ethan Walker first arrived. The screen filled with medical notes, transfer reports, and military documentation, but Carla was not looking for numbers or diagnoses. She was looking for a name. After several minutes of scrolling, she finally found it in a small paragraph attached to a deployment summary. K9 Unit Partner, German Shepherd, call sign Rex. Carla stared at the words for a long moment while the low hum of hospital equipment filled the quiet room around her. Rex. The name hung in the air like something half remembered from a dream. Slowly she turned in her chair and looked back down the corridor. The dog was still there, exactly where he had been, sitting in front of the door, as if he had been guarding it for hours or perhaps for years. Carla stood again and walked back toward him, this time feeling a sense of awe that she could not quite explain. When she reached him, she crouched carefully and spoke the name aloud, almost like a test whispered into the stillness. Rex. The reaction was immediate but gentle. The shepherd's ears lifted sharply and his eyes locked onto her face with sudden alertness, the way a trained partner reacts when his call sign echoes across a field. He did not bark or jump or move wildly. Instead, his tail made one slow sweep against the floor, and he stood up with quiet certainty before turning his head once more toward the door of room 214. Carla felt her breath catch. There was no doubt now. The dog had not wandered into the hospital by accident, and he had not chosen this door randomly. Somehow, across miles and time and the silent passing of 3 long years, The Marine's partner had found his way back to the one place where his soldiers still lay waiting. And as the quiet hallway clock moved closer to 4 in the morning, Carla realized something that made the moment feel even more extraordinary. The dog had not come here to search. He had come here because he already knew exactly where Ethan Walker was. Carla remained crouched beside the German Shepherd for several quiet seconds, the name Rex still echoing softly in her mind while the dog stood alert beside her, his gaze returning again and again to the closed door of room 214, as if every instinct inside him pointed to the man resting behind it. The hallway clock ticked closer to 4:30 in the morning, and the soft mechanical rhythm of distant medical equipment floated through the corridor like a slow heartbeat. Carla stood up slowly, brushing her hands against her scrubs while she thought about the photograph she had just seen on the hospital computer. The resemblance was too clear to ignore. The dog in that picture beside Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker had the same intelligent eyes, the same confident posture, the same calm patience that now filled the hallway outside the Marine's room. She glanced down again at Rex, and he met her gaze briefly before lifting his nose toward the door, breathing in quietly as if he could sense something through the walls. Carla felt a gentle pull of compassion she could not quite explain. Hospital rules were strict about animals and patient areas, especially inside intensive care rooms. But rules sometimes felt small when compared to moments that carried the weight of something deeper. She walked to the door of room 214 and placed her hand on the handle, hesitating only for a moment before opening it slightly. Inside the room the lights were dim, and the steady sound of the cardiac monitor filled the quiet space with its familiar pattern of soft electronic tones. Ethan Walker lay exactly as he had for months, his dark hair trimmed neatly, his face calm and still, as if he were resting after a long journey that had not yet finished. The early morning glow from a distant streetlight filtered through the window blinds and painted faint silver lines across the hospital floor. Carla stepped back into the hallway and looked down at Rex again. The dog had not moved from his place beside the door, but now his ears stood tall and focused, as if he had sensed the change in the air the moment the door opened. She studied him carefully, searching for any sign of nervousness or restlessness, but there was none. Instead, there was only quiet certainty. Slowly, she knelt beside him again and spoke softly. "Rex," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Do you want to see him?" The German Shepherd's reaction was immediate yet calm. His head lifted higher, his body leaning slightly forward as though a silent command had finally been given after a very long wait. Carla opened the door wider this time, stepping aside just enough to create space. For a moment Rex remained still, studying the doorway as if confirming that the path ahead truly belonged to him. Then he began to walk forward, each step careful and steady against the polished hospital floor. His nails clicked gently against the tiles, echoing quietly down the silent hallway. When he reached the doorway, he paused once more, turning his head toward Carla for the briefest second before stepping inside the room where his partner had been sleeping for nearly 3 years. The nurse remained in the hallway watching, her heart beating a little faster without fully understanding why. Something about the moment felt larger than a routine night shift inside a hospital corridor. It felt like the beginning of a story that had been waiting a very long time to continue. The room was dim and quiet when Rex stepped inside, the soft glow of the monitor reflecting against the polished metal rail of the hospital bed, while the steady rhythm of the machine continued its patient beeping as if it had been counting the hours for years. The German Shepherd moved slowly across the floor, each step careful and measured, his eyes fixed on the figure resting beneath the white sheets. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker lay exactly as he had the night before and the night before that, his breathing slow and even, his face calm in the way that comes from a deep place where dreams and silence live together. Rex stopped halfway between the door and the bed, lowering his head slightly as if he were listening, not with his ears alone, but with the quiet instinct that had guided him across miles to this room. Behind him, Carla remained near the doorway, watching without speaking, afraid that even the smallest sound might break whatever invisible thread had brought the dog here. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, the faint smell of antiseptic hanging in the air, while the early glow of approaching dawn filtered softly through the window blinds. Rex took another step forward, then another, until he stood beside the bed where Ethan rested. His nose lifted gently toward the edge of the mattress, and he breathed in slowly, as if confirming a memory he had carried for years. The scent was there beneath the sterile smell of hospital sheets, faint but unmistakable, the familiar trace of the man who had once walked beside him across endless desert roads and quiet military bases. The German shepherd's tail moved once, slowly, not in excitement, but in recognition. For several seconds, he simply stood there, watching the still face of the Marine who had once been his partner. His ears shifted forward and back as if he were waiting for a voice he remembered, a command spoken with calm authority, the sound of footsteps that used to move beside his own. But the room remained quiet except for the soft mechanical rhythm of the monitor. Rex lowered his head closer to the bed and gently nudged the blanket near Ethan's hand. The movement was careful and respectful, the way a loyal companion greets someone who has been away for too long. Ethan did not move. His hand rested exactly where it always had, palm relaxed against the white sheet, fingers still and pale beneath the dim hospital light. Rex studied that hand for a moment, then lifted his nose again, breathing in deeply as if drawing strength from a scent that belonged to another life. Carla could feel her heart beating a little faster as she watched the quiet exchange between the sleeping Marine and the dog who had found him again. Something about the stillness of the moment made the entire room feel suspended in time. Rex shifted his weight slightly and placed his front paws against the side of the bed, not climbing yet, simply steadying himself as he looked more closely at Ethan's face. His amber eyes softened with a quiet focus that seemed almost human. For 3 years the Marine had rested in silence while the world moved forward without him, but now his oldest partner stood only inches away, breathing the same air once again. Rex lowered his head until his nose rested gently against the edge of Ethan's arm, and in that quiet hospital room, before the sun had even begun to rise over the city, the long wait between soldier and dog was finally coming to an end. Rex remained steady beside the bed, his front paws resting carefully against the mattress rail while his nose stayed close to Ethan Walker's still arm, as if the scent alone was enough to hold the years together. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of the monitor and the faint whisper of the ventilation system above the ceiling tiles. Carla stood just inside the doorway, barely breathing as she watched the scene unfold with the quiet patience that only long night shifts can teach a nurse. Rex lifted his head slowly and studied Ethan's face again, his ears flicking forward as though he expected the Marine to open his eyes at any moment and speak the familiar command that had once guided him through countless patrols and long dusty roads. But the man remained still, his chest rising gently beneath the hospital blanket, the slow mechanical beeps continuing their steady count of time. The German shepherd leaned forward slightly and placed his nose against Ethan's hand, pressing just enough to feel the warmth beneath the skin. His tail moved once behind him, brushing softly against the side of the bed. For several seconds nothing changed. The room remained suspended in its quiet rhythm while the faint glow of early morning light slowly brightened the window blinds. Then Rex shifted his weight. With calm determination, he lifted one paw higher onto the mattress, followed by the other, climbing carefully the way a trained service dog might approach a wounded partner on the ground. The bed dipped slightly beneath his weight, but Ethan did not stir. Rex stepped gently across the blanket until he stood beside the Marine's chest, his large body careful not to disturb the medical wires that rested against Ethan's shoulder. Carla instinctively stepped forward, ready to intervene if necessary, but something about the dog's careful movements stopped her. Rex lowered himself slowly onto the bed, folding his legs beneath him with quiet precision until he rested against Ethan's side. His head leaned forward until it settled softly on the Marine's chest, exactly over the slow rise and fall of his breathing. The monitor continued its steady rhythm for a moment longer, then the pattern shifted almost too subtly to notice. Carla's eyes moved to the screen as the numbers flickered slightly higher before settling again into a new pace. She frowned gently, stepping closer to confirm what she was seeing. Rex did not move. He remained perfectly still with his head resting on Ethan's chest, his ears relaxed now, his eyes half closed as if he had finally reached the place he had been searching for during a very long journey. The Marine's breathing deepened slightly beneath him, the small change almost invisible but unmistakable to someone who had watched that monitor for months. Carla felt a quiet shiver move through her shoulders as the realization slowly formed in her mind. For 3 years the machines had kept Ethan Walker alive, while the world waited for something to change. And now, in the quiet hours before sunrise, the one presence that had shared every mission beside him had returned and placed his head exactly where it belonged, as if the bond between soldier and dog had simply paused and was now beginning to wake again. The room remained wrapped in a fragile quiet as Rex rested across Ethan Walker's chest, his head rising and falling gently with the Marine's slow breathing, while the pale morning light behind the blinds grew brighter by the minute. Carla stood near the foot of the bed, her eyes shifting between the dog and the monitor, trying to decide whether the small changes she was seeing were real or simply the hopeful imagination that sometimes visits people who spend too many nights inside hospital walls. The numbers on the screen had moved only slightly, but after months of still patterns, even the smallest shift felt like a whisper in a silent room. Rex did not seem to notice the machines or the wires that ran beside the pillow. He remained calm and steady, his body warm against Ethan's chest, as if he had returned to a familiar resting place after a long journey. Every few seconds his ears flicked softly, responding to sounds too quiet for human ears to notice. The distant footsteps in the hallway, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the quiet breath of the man beneath him. Carla stepped closer to the bed and watched the Marine's face carefully. For years Ethan Walker had remained suspended in a place beyond waking, his expression unchanged, his eyes closed as if he were listening to something far away. But now there was the smallest shift in the muscles near his brow, a faint movement so subtle that Carla leaned forward to be sure she had truly seen it. Rex sensed the change immediately. His head lifted slightly, his amber eyes focusing on Ethan's face with sudden alertness, the same attention he might have shown during a patrol when his partner signaled that something important was happening. The dog remained still for a moment, studying the Marine with quiet concentration. Then he gave the softest sound in his throat, not a bark and not a whine, but a low breath that carried the weight of recognition. Carla felt the hairs on her arms rise. She glanced at the monitor again and saw the heart rate shift by another small step, the rhythm adjusting as if the sleeping Marine had heard something in the room and was slowly beginning to answer it. Rex lowered his head once more against Ethan's chest, pressing closer this time as though offering the comfort of a familiar presence. The movement was gentle and careful, the kind of closeness that comes from years of silent understanding between two partners who had once relied on each other in places far from hospital walls. Minutes passed quietly. The first thin line of sunrise slipped through the blinds and stretched across the bed, touching the side of Rex's fur and the still hand resting beside him. Carla watched that hand carefully, her breath held without realizing it. For a long moment nothing happened. Then one finger moved. It was only a slight twitch, the smallest motion imaginable, but it was real. Carla stepped forward so quickly that the chair beside the wall rolled softly across the floor. Her eyes widened as she looked from the hand to the dog and back again. Rex had already lifted his head. His ears stood tall, and his eyes locked onto the Marine's face with quiet intensity, as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment since the night he first arrived at the hospital door. The tiny movement of Ethan Walker's finger lasted less than a second, but inside the quiet hospital room it felt like thunder rolling across a silent sky. Carla froze beside the bed, her eyes fixed on the Marine's hand as if afraid the moment might disappear if she even breathed too loudly. For 3 years that hand had remained completely still beneath the white hospital sheet, resting in the same quiet position day after day while machines carried the rhythm of life for him. Now one finger had moved. Only slightly. Only once. But it had moved. Rex noticed immediately. The German shepherd lifted his head from Ethan's chest and stared down at the hand with intense focus, his ears standing tall and alert as though he had heard a distant command. His body remained calm, but there was a quiet energy in his posture now, the kind that appears when a trained partner senses something important unfolding. Carla slowly reached for the monitor beside the bed, her heart beating faster as she studied the numbers. The heart rate had shifted again, not dramatically, but enough to confirm that the small changes were real. The Marine's breathing had deepened, each rise of his chest slightly stronger than before. Carla felt a surge of cautious hope move through her chest. the kind that nurses learn to guard carefully, because hope can be fragile inside hospital rooms. She leaned closer to Ethan and watched his face. For a moment nothing happened. Then the muscles near his eyelids trembled faintly, the subtle movement barely visible beneath the soft morning light that now filled the room. Rex lowered his head closer to Ethan's face, his nose hovering inches away as if he were waiting for the next signal. The dog's tail moved slowly once across the blanket, brushing against the sheet in a quiet rhythm that matched the steady sound of the monitor. Carla pressed the call button on the wall, her voice low but urgent as she spoke into the intercom, requesting a physician to come to room 214. Footsteps soon echoed down the hallway outside, but inside the room the moment remained focused on the silent connection between the Marine and the dog resting beside him. Rex leaned closer until his warm breath touched Ethan's cheek. The German Shepherd gave a soft exhale, the gentle sound carrying something deeper than instinct, something built from years of trust and partnership that no training manual could ever explain. The Marine's eyelids fluttered again. This time the movement lasted longer. Carla felt tears gather unexpectedly in the corners of her eyes as she watched the change unfolding in front of her. Slowly, as if rising from the deepest sleep imaginable, Ethan Walker's eyes began to open. The first thing they saw was the familiar shape of a German Shepherd's face only inches away, amber eyes filled with steady loyalty, watching him with the quiet patience of a partner who had never truly left his side. Ethan Walker's eyes opened slowly, the way a door moves after years of being closed, uncertain at first, and then gradually wider as light returned to a place that had been silent for far too long. The hospital room appeared in blurred shapes and pale colors, the white ceiling, the faint glow of morning light behind the blinds, and the soft shadow resting across his chest. For a moment his vision struggled to focus, as though his mind was searching through distant memories to understand where he was. Then the shape above him shifted slightly, and two familiar amber eyes looked back into his. Rex did not bark or move suddenly. He simply held Ethan's gaze with calm intensity, the same steady look he had given his partner 1,000 times during patrols, training days, and long quiet nights on base. Ethan's breathing changed as recognition slowly formed behind his tired eyes. His lips parted slightly, and the faintest sound escaped his throat, rough and fragile from years of silence. Rex. The name was barely louder than a whisper, but the German Shepherd responded instantly. His ears lifted and his tail moved across the blanket with a slow sweep, not wild with excitement, but filled with the quiet certainty that the moment he had waited for had finally arrived. Ethan blinked again, trying to bring the world into clearer focus. The weight resting on his chest felt warm and familiar, and as his vision sharpened, he saw the broad shape of the dog lying beside him, exactly where Rex had rested countless times after long missions when the two partners finally returned to safety. The monitor beside the bed began to quicken its rhythm slightly, responding to the returning awareness flowing through the Marine's body. Carla stood frozen near the foot of the bed, one hand covering her mouth as the impossible moment unfolded in front of her eyes. She had called the doctor only seconds earlier, but now she could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Ethan's eyes moved slowly around the room, confusion and wonder mixing together as his mind struggled to reconnect the fragments of memory scattered across 3 long years. When his gaze returned to Rex, something softened in his expression, the faint trace of a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. His hand lifted weakly from the sheet, the movement slow and uncertain, but real. Rex immediately lowered his head closer, pressing his nose gently against Ethan's fingers as though guiding the hand back to a place it remembered. The Marine's fingers curled slightly into the fur along the dog's neck, and for a moment the two remained perfectly still, soldier and partner reunited in a quiet hospital room while the morning sun climbed slowly higher outside the window. Footsteps approached rapidly in the hallway, doctors and nurses responding to Carla's call, but inside the room the most important reunion had already happened. Ethan Walker looked into the eyes of the dog who had crossed miles to find him again, and in that silent exchange something stronger than medicine had finally brought a sleeping soldier back to the world. The door to room 214 opened quickly as 2 nurses and a physician stepped inside, their movements calm but urgent, drawn by Carla's earlier call and the sudden changes appearing on the monitor. Yet when they entered the room, they slowed almost immediately, because the scene before them was unlike anything they had expected to find during an early morning hospital check. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker was awake. His eyes were open, still heavy with the weight of long sleep, but undeniably aware, moving slowly across the room, as if the world itself were returning piece by piece. Rex remained lying beside him on the bed, his head lifted now, watching the Marine with the quiet focus of a partner who understood that something extraordinary had just happened. Ethan's hand still rested against the thick fur along Rex's neck, his fingers weak but determined, as though he feared the dog might disappear if he let go. The doctor approached carefully, glancing at the monitor before leaning slightly closer to the patient. "Ethan, can you hear me?" the doctor asked gently. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the voice, confusion and recognition passing slowly across his face. His throat moved as he tried to speak again, the sound rough from years without words, but this time the whisper carried a little more strength. "Rex." The German shepherd's ears lifted again at the sound of his name, and his tail moved once against the blanket in quiet reassurance. The doctor exchanged a quick glance with Carla, disbelief flickering across his face before professional focus returned. He checked Ethan's pupils with a small light and asked another question, but Ethan's eyes drifted back to Rex as if nothing else in the room mattered. For a long moment, the Marine simply looked at the dog beside him, studying the familiar shape of the shepherd's face, the steady amber eyes that had once watched the horizon beside him on countless days. A faint smile appeared again on Ethan's lips, fragile but real. The machines continued their steady rhythm, stronger now than they had been in months, responding to the return of consciousness flowing slowly through the Marine's body. Carla stepped closer to the bed, her voice soft with amazement as she spoke. "Ethan, you have been asleep for a long time." But he seemed to understand more from the presence beside him than from the words around him. His fingers moved again through Rex's fur, the simple motion filled with quiet gratitude. The German shepherd lowered his head slightly, pressing closer to Ethan's chest, as if confirming that the bond between them had never truly broken. Around the room, the medical staff began checking equipment and noting the changes that had taken place, but even they could not ignore the quiet truth unfolding in front of them. For 3 years, medicine had waited for Ethan Walker to return. Yet in the quiet hours before sunrise, it had been the presence of a loyal partner who finally led him back. Morning light filled the hospital room more fully now, slipping through the window blinds in soft golden lines that stretched across the floor and climbed slowly up the side of the bed, where Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker lay awake for the first time in 3 long years. The machines beside him continued their quiet rhythm, steady and reassuring, but the center of the room was no longer the equipment or the monitors. It was the silent understanding between the Marine and the German shepherd who still rested beside him. Rex remained close against Ethan's chest, his head lifted now, watching every small movement the Marine made as if he were memorizing each breath. Ethan's eyes moved more easily around the room now, adjusting slowly to the brightness of morning, though they returned again and again to the familiar shape beside him. His hand remained buried gently in Rex's thick fur, the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing grounding him in a reality that still felt almost dreamlike. The doctor finished checking the monitor and nodded quietly to Carla, his voice calm, but filled with cautious amazement as he spoke about vital signs stabilizing and neurological response returning. Yet Ethan barely seemed to hear the medical explanations unfolding nearby. His attention remained fixed on the dog who had somehow crossed the distance between them after all this time. Rex leaned forward slightly and brushed his nose against Ethan's shoulder, the gesture gentle and deliberate, as if confirming that the man beneath his paws was truly awake and present once more. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly in the fur along Rex's neck, a small but meaningful sign of strength returning to muscles that had been silent for years. His voice came again, still rough but clearer now, the words slow and careful as they formed. "You found me." The sentence hung softly in the room, simple and full of quiet wonder. Rex responded by lowering his head again against Ethan's chest, settling into the same position where he had rested earlier, as though nothing about this reunion felt unusual to him at all. To the dog, the moment carried no miracle, no surprise. It was simply the natural return of a partner he had never stopped waiting for. Carla felt her eyes sting again as she watched the exchange. In hospitals, people often speak about recovery in numbers and charts, about treatment plans and long months of therapy, but what she was witnessing felt deeper than any clinical explanation. It was the quiet strength of loyalty made visible. Outside the room, the hospital had begun to wake with the sounds of morning staff arriving and carts rolling down distant hallways, but inside room 214 the world seemed to move more slowly. Ethan's breathing grew stronger with each passing minute, and the confusion in his eyes gradually softened into calm awareness. His gaze met Rex's again, and this time the Marine's smile was easier, warmer, filled with the understanding that he had not returned to the world alone. The dog who had once walked beside him across distant deserts had found his way back to the one place where he was needed most, and now, in the quiet glow of a new morning, soldier and partner rested together again exactly where they belonged. The morning continued to grow brighter outside the hospital windows, and with it the quiet room slowly filled with the gentle rhythm of life returning piece by piece. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker remained resting against the raised pillows of the hospital bed, his eyes now open and aware though still heavy with the weight of years that had passed without his knowing. Rex had not moved far from him. The German Shepherd remained close against the side of the bed, his body partly curled beside the Marine while his head rested calmly across Ethan's arm, the steady warmth of the dog's presence anchoring the fragile moment of recovery. Nurses and doctors had finished their first careful examinations and stepped out briefly to arrange the next stages of treatment, leaving the room quieter again. Carla lingered near the doorway for a moment before softly closing it halfway, giving the Marine and his partner a small island of calm within the busy hospital morning. Ethan turned his head slowly toward the window where sunlight now filled the room in long golden bands. His voice returned again, still quiet but stronger than before as he spoke slowly, forming each word with effort. "How long?" Carla stepped closer and answered gently, choosing honesty but softening the weight of the truth. "Almost 3 years." Ethan's eyes closed briefly as the number settled into his mind. When they opened again, they moved immediately toward Rex, whose ears lifted the moment he heard the Marine's voice. For a second the two simply looked at one another, the silent understanding between them deeper than anything that could be explained in words. Ethan's hand moved again across the dog's neck, the simple motion now a little stronger than before. Rex leaned closer, pressing his head softly beneath Ethan's hand as though guiding the touch that had once been so familiar between them. The Marine exhaled slowly, the breath carrying a quiet mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "I thought I lost everything," he murmured. But Rex remained exactly where he was, calm and steady, his presence answering the fear that still lingered in Ethan's voice. Outside the room, the hospital continued its routine morning rhythm, carts rolling down hallways, distant voices calling out patient updates, sunlight climbing higher across the buildings of the city. Yet inside room 214 something simpler and more powerful had taken place. A soldier who had been lost to silence had returned, guided not by alarms or medication, but by the unwavering loyalty of the partner who had refused to forget him. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked once more at the dog resting beside him. His voice came again, this time with a faint trace of the strength that had once carried him across distant missions. "Good boy, Rex." The German Shepherd responded with the smallest movement of his tail against the blanket, the quiet gesture filled with the calm certainty that the long watch he had kept outside that hospital door was finally over. The room had grown peaceful again after the doctors finished their examinations and stepped quietly back into the hallway, leaving the door slightly open so the soft sounds of the waking hospital drifted gently inside. Morning sunlight now filled the entire space, warming the white walls and reflecting softly against the polished floor beneath the bed where Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker rested with eyes fully open, breathing deeper and steadier with every passing minute. Rex remained beside him without hesitation, the German Shepherd's large frame curled partly along the blanket, as if this place had always belonged to him. His head rested across Ethan's arm, the dog's steady breathing rising and falling with quiet patience. Outside the window the city had begun its ordinary day, cars moving along distant streets, people beginning their routines, unaware that inside one quiet hospital room a small miracle of loyalty had just unfolded. Ethan turned his head slowly toward the window for a moment, absorbing the sunlight and the gentle movement of clouds across the sky. Then his gaze returned to the dog beside him. For a long time he simply watched Rex, studying the familiar shape of the shepherd's ears, the intelligent amber eyes, the calm strength that had once walked beside him through places far from home. His hand moved again through the fur along Rex's neck, stronger now than before, the touch no longer fragile, but steady and certain. Rex responded by lifting his head slightly and looking back at him, the quiet connection between them unchanged by the years that had passed. Ethan let out a slow breath, and a small smile returned to his face, warmer this time, filled with the calm realization that some bonds do not fade even when time tries to pull them apart. Carla stood quietly near the doorway watching the moment unfold, her expression gentle and thoughtful. She had worked in hospitals for many years, and she had seen recovery come in many forms, through medicine, through therapy, through long months of patient effort. But what she had witnessed that morning felt different, something that no chart or textbook could fully explain. It was loyalty that had waited 3 long years without losing hope. Ethan's voice came again, clearer now as he spoke softly to the dog who had refused to forget him. "Looks like you kept watch for both of us." Rex's tail brushed slowly against the blanket in response, the simple movement carrying the calm certainty of a promise kept. The Marine closed his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion this time, but from quiet peace, his hand still resting against the warm fur beside him. In that peaceful hospital room, beneath the soft light of a new day, a soldier who had once been lost to. Silence rested beside the partner who had never stopped believing he would come back. And sometimes, in a world that moves too quickly to notice small acts of devotion, it is loyalty like that which reminds us that the strongest bonds are not measured by time, distance, or even silence, but by the simple truth that some hearts never stop waiting for the ones they love.